What's up, gamers? WQ here, guys, with Alpha Gamer Mindset, and this channel is dedicated to making your mindset the alpha gamer so that you can dominate your games, win in your games, know why you win in your games. Now, gamers, make sure to head over to my Patreon and donate to me on Patreon if you like my content and you want to support this channel. That greatly helps me create content for this channel. So, gamers, my first video on this channel, I was talking about the difference between logic and reason, and why if you use logic to solve a problem, it actually guarantees you a solution that works, where if you use the reason, you can end up going any goofy solution and that doesn't actually solve your problem. The reason I made that video is because oftentimes you see in a speed run, people use reasons for arguments and then they come to conclusions and then they base their beliefs off of those conclusions. But the problem is they were rooted in a reason that's not true, that's not correct, and it gives them the wrong answer. They mess up and then they don't know how to solve the problem, and so they go back and they just keep trying, or they keep repeating the same problem, where if they use logic to create solutions, they actually would have ended up on the right answer and they would be doing it much better. Again, you can look at solving a very simple equation with this. It's very easy. But gamers, today we're going to talk about something that deviates a little bit from this track. It's called ego. It's called human ego. It's called ego theory. This is ego theory. This creates natural gameplay. This is the whole purpose of my life. Welcome to the Alpha Gamer Mindset. So ego theory says fundamentally human behavior stems from ego. So Google defines ego as a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. This is a pretty good definition. Now we're going to actually define ego later on, fortunately, but it's effectively the same here. And also, I do think it's important to think of ego as more of an abstract term in the sense about your own desire and your own self-value and self-worth and self-importance, really, because the main objective of gameplay is to minimize your ego, and then you're actually going to improve your gameplay. And that is actually an argument that we're going to create and then use much later on in this channel. It's not actually a made-up thing, and it's not a metaphorical thing. It's a real thing that we're going to use to create better gameplay. But guys, ego theory gets a little bit deeper than that. So the thing about ego theory is that every human behavior always is a product of human ego. So this is extremely important, because what this means, and especially what this means if you look at this through a natural lens, and natural on this channel, natural means it happened. If something is natural, it means it happened. It's the same in natural selection, where natural selection, you're looking at what's actually happened in evolution, and then those characteristics and those traits that won out in evolution, those are the superior traits, right? Because they happened, not because they were superior because someone said so, or they were theoretically superior. They were superior because they happened. So it's the same definition that we use on this channel. So if I say natural, it just means that something happened. So if somebody loses, it was technically, by the natural argument, it was actually superior that they lost, right? This is the ultimate outcome because it happened. There's no other reason. So that's how evolution works, right? It's the same way this is why we call it natural gameplay, right? We're using the naturalistic perspective. But let's just focus on why the person lost, right? So the thing about ego theory is no matter what, when you lose, it's always a product of your ego. And this is because all human behaviors are a product of your ego, right? Humans are completely focused on their own ego. In fact, they're only capable of focusing on their own ego and doing things and pursuing behavior specifically for their own ego. So in some cases, if you do something that's selfless for another person, that is still a move done for your ego, because selflessness is a admirable trait, right? So it's the same if you look at the paradox of modesty. If somebody is extremely modest, then they are the most modest person on the world, let's say. Well, the problem with that is now they're the best at being modest, right? Or if humble, it's the same with humility. Suddenly, no longer are they actually the most humble person. They're not the most modest person, right? It would be somebody who's not being the most modest. It's somebody who's showing off. So what happens is that person who's showing off or that person who is not showing off by being not the best, he's actually being more modest. But then what happens is he's not modest anymore because he's being more modest, right? This is a paradox about modesty, humility that is created, and you actually cannot try to be humble. You then become less humble by trying to be humble, right? And it works the same with ego, but we're going to get into that later. So the point of that is that there is no truly altruistic action under the ego theory lens. Now, you actually can achieve altruistic actions, but we're going to get that into a different video. What I want to talk about right now is the depths of ego theory, because what ego theory says is that all your behaviors are derived from your ego. They're derived from your own self-worth, your own self-importance, your own sense of self-importance. So all your behaviors are fundamentally derived from that. So if you go into gameplay, your gameplay is 100% derived from your own sense of self-importance. It's not derived from logical, critical thinking, and it's not derived from value in the gameplay. Now, that's important because most people think their gameplay is actually derived from a value system, the gameplay's value system, right? The game's value system, and so they're doing the best moves, or they want to do the best moves. They're pursuing the best moves. But this is not true. Their behaviors are derived from their own sense of self-importance. Now, there's one very important thing about this. For your self-importance, let's really think, and if you're a gamer, you have experiences for this. For your own self-importance, would it be much better to lose early to something that was silly or to something that you could have won than to try your hardest and fail? When you try your hardest and fail, you don't have a backup. When you throw a match early or you don't try in a match, you actually have backups, right? These backups are called excuses because you could have tried, or the opponent got lucky, or you haven't been playing that long, right? So these are excuses that are created, but the point of these excuses is that they empower your sense of self-importance. That's why these excuses are so valuable. So for a lot of people, it's a lot more worth it, or it's a lot more valuable to lose and take a loss than it is to actually try and maybe squeeze out a small chance of winning, because their own sense of self-importance is what they're really going for. So at a low level of anxiety, you can bluff and you can do a lot more than you can at a higher level of anxiety. So if you're facing an opponent that's much worse than you, you can easily defeat him. But if you're in a hard match and an opponent is really good, your anxiety is going to go up, right? So your desire to try might go down a lot. Now, there are some other things going on. If you have an easy opponent that you're going to beat easily, you can still make excuses. You can still not try. In fact, you can claim that you defeated him easily, or you can claim that you were playing amazing that day, or you were gifted, or there's a lot of different excuses that people can make. In fact, the depths of ego theory and how many excuses people can make, it goes way deeper than this even. You'll see people create groups of friends, and then these groups will actually create their own value system that's outside of the game, and then they'll try to promote that value system within the clique, right? What then happens is that they're effectively changing the goalposts. They're changing the value system so that they can intentionally fail, but they at least achieved their new value system, right? Therefore, it gives them a higher sense of self-importance, even though, according to the predetermined rules, they've lost. Okay, so what's the big problem here? Your gameplay's worse. You play worse. When you don't try, you actually play worse. So your gameplay is worse. That's the big problem. So if you want to improve your skill at something, you could actually reduce your ego. And if you did reduce your ego, you would actually effectively try harder. You might not just try harder. You might look for different strategies, learn different strategies. You might actually make more of an attempt to figure out why you lost, figure out what the opponent is doing. You might, instead of say the opponent got lucky or the opponent is naturally gifted, You might actually try to look for, oh, he's doing this specific strategy that I can copy, that I can recreate, right? What are characteristics of a person who does that? His ego is low, right? He's more realistic and pragmatic about the game. He doesn't have such a big ego. One thing I'm trying to say here is that no matter what, if you ever lose in any situation, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of anything, it's always a product of your ego. Now, many people will say, well, what if I just wasn't playing good? What if I was either drunk or high? I was intoxicated. What if I was physically ill? What if my opponent and I both attack each other on the same frame? And for example, in Super Smash Bros. Melee, there's port priority. The opponent had port priority, and I didn't have port priority, and that's why he won. And I think that actually happened in a tournament match recently. And guess what? The better player won because of port priority. Was it port priority or was it fundamental ego? It's always fundamental ego. It's always fundamental ego. No matter if you're sick, no matter if you are intoxicated under in any argument, doesn't matter if you don't even have a completely functioning system. In fact, it doesn't even matter if you did lose on the same frame.
No exaggeration, one of the best sets I've ever seen in my entire life. That up B!
That up B is nuts! Dude, that's so close. Rishi could have had that set.
Oh my god!
If you both went same frame and you got the bad dice roll, none of that stuff matters. Losing is always absolute, and it's always a product of ego. Now, when we get deeper into this channel, I am going to talk about gameplay always being a product of gameplay, and so then we will talk about random values, and that is actually different than what I'm saying now. So that's not an issue, actually. When we get there, we're going to understand. What I want you to understand is that when you lose, it's because of your ego. It's because you don't understand the gameplay well enough and you're not good enough at the game. It's always because of that. Any excuse you have is just an excuse. And it doesn't matter what the excuse is. In fact, it could be the most solid. It could be the best excuse in the world. It still doesn't matter. You have to look at the placements. You have to look at the results. Always, no matter the situation. Otherwise, what happens is your ego overtakes you. So if you want to get better at a game, you want to reduce your ego. You want to reduce your own sense of self-importance. And so you can stop putting value into getting a personal win and start putting value into getting a win through the gameplay. So on a technical level, if you want to improve at a game, you need to reduce your ego, and then by product of doing that, your gameplay is actually going to get better. The reason you can never attribute a loss to an excuse ever, no matter the circumstance, is because the ridiculous lengths somebody will go to feel better about themselves, to lose intentionally, to feel better about themselves, they will blow you away. They would completely blow you away. In fact, people will sign up. They will sign up to a game. They will start playing or a hobby, and they'll play it for 10 years straight, and they'll try every day, and they'll practice every day, and they won't quite reach their goals. And they say, why? And I say, because at the start of it all, you never wanted to reach your goals. You wanted to lose to make yourself feel better. You wanted to lose because you didn't want to actually try. You didn't want to lose, go all out, and then lose. And then you're left with only failure. When you lose and you give up before you lose, and that's why you lost, you're not left with only failure. You're left with failure and then a sense of self-accomplishment. Oh, I played really good today. I could have won. When you go all out and you lose, there's no I could have won. You tried every trick in the book. You exhausted every resource. You 100% lost. There's nothing you can do about that, right? That means you're actually an inferior player. Most people don't want to handle that they are an inferior player. And so they will set up mental traps to make sure they lose so that they can feel better about themselves. Some people will never explore greater options. They'll never explore better options. They'll only keep practicing what they're doing. They'll only stay consistent. Why? This is another tactic that they are purposely losing. This is another tactic designed to lose. When you see people stay on a slower strategy, or they stay with safer strats when it goes beyond the realm of reason, that is their ego speaking. That's not gameplay speaking. That is their ego speaking. And they argue they could be a higher place on the leaderboard, or they're a higher skill level, Or maybe somebody else will argue they're a higher skill level. It doesn't even matter. If somebody else is arguing that you're a higher skill level, that's your ego. That's not even their ego. It is their ego as well, but we're talking about your results. So that's your ego now. You've actually, you coerced that player. I've been talking about relationships on my main channel a lot lately, and the reason is because many times when somebody sees somebody attractive, they're not actually interested in that person. They're interested in their own sense of self-importance. And so what they do is they flirt with that person. They act like they're interested, but they're not interested. They just want attention. They just want attention, and they just want some kind of validation. And so what they do is they will flirt and flirt and flirt. And sometimes they even act like they want a relationship. But they don't want a relationship. And this is why I've been talking about a lot on my main channel about why it's important that girls and guys play games with each other. They play for flirting head games with each other. Because what happens is it increases anxiety, and then people's real behaviors can come out. It's the same in the gaming world. When anxiety really hits, your real behaviors, your real desires, they actually do come out. So a very simple, low-level form of ego is when people pick up really crazy, flashy strategies that are also really fast, but they're slightly inconsistent. And they can do them pretty well in practice. Have you ever heard of anybody do this? It's extremely common in any game. It's the lowest level of ego. And what happens is they go into a run, and then the strategy doesn't work, or the practice doesn't work. And they say, I practiced this for 10 hours last night. Doesn't work in a run. Well, of course it doesn't work in a run. It was designed to not work in a run. It was designed to fail so that they can claim something's wrong. They can look for validation, right? They can lose. That's why they practice the strategy, in order to lose. A player who understands anxiety would understand that that strategy has a very high chance of not working. And so they would never even learn the strategy, or they would learn it and then pick up an easier, more consistent strategy, or they would find a recreatable way to do the strategy that they can guarantee under high anxiety situation. And then they would actually succeed at the strategy. You see this a lot in Super Smash Bros. Melee with flashy tech skill, especially with space animals. People constantly do this. They practice tech skill hours and hours and hours a day, and it does absolutely nothing for them. They don't understand or learn anything about the game. They go into a match, and then they get destroyed. Now, sometimes it actually works. Like 1 out of 10 times it works, or it works against their friends. All that does is support their validation that this is maybe a good idea, right? But it's not working in the long run. In fact, it fails every single time when it comes to a clutch moment. And you often see people label it as chokers, where I don't really think they're even chokers. I think they just have bad gameplay and don't understand anything about gameplay, and they don't seem to be tackling the issues that are coming up. Another form of ego is people specifically trying to counter this problem by just doing things that are really safe or really slow or super reliable or super consistent. So this doesn't actually solve the problem. This is a deeper level of ego. It's just ego applied to ego. And so what happens is you might actually see better results from these people, but there's another problem too. And this is why it's ego, because when you only do safe strats or you only do consistent strats, you don't actually become more consistent. Because a lot of consistency is about thinking, and it's about creating dynamic gameplay. It's not about creating static gameplay that's slightly slower but more stable. The reason for that is you're still going to choke when anxiety gets high, but also what's going to happen is your ceilings aren't going to be as high when you have more consistent gameplay. Oftentimes you see players who only practice crazy stuff go on crazy streaks of winning. Now, this is another purpose of their ego, and there's actually winning in this sense. Like, they'll go on a crazy streak, or they'll get a crazy PB, or they'll win a crazy tournament like crazy. You see that often happen in League of Legends and in local Melee scene. Even in the competitive Melee scene, a guy named SFAT, he got second place at a really big tournament a few years ago, and everyone was hyping up for him. He never did well at a single tournament after, and he never really did well at a single tournament before. Actually, he may have done well at a second tournament, but basically he had one big tournament. Well, that wasn't even to his advantage. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, SFAT's working. SFAT's a wild card. SFAT can do it. Not really. All that happened is that tournament is validating his gameplay that doesn't work on average. In fact, he didn't even win that tournament, and if you look at the other players at the tournament, a lot of them weren't in top shape. So it seemed like he took advantage of an easy moment to make himself look a lot better than he is. So back to people that try to counter this, They're not actually countering it at all. They aren't actually doing anything. And I think you see people like Swedish Delight. In Melee, again, he's basically just doing the opposite as what SFAT is doing. They have the same balanced results, where SFAT is more hit and miss. Swedish Delight is more stable, but neither one of them are standout players. Neither one of them truly understand Melee at a high or top level. And I think it's interesting because Swedish Delight also had a breakout tournament. He also had a single very good tournament where he got second place, and then he never really did anything afterwards. There's actually a lot of players in Melee that do this at a high level and not a top level, and I think it's interesting because the players at the top level of Melee all have a very good career. They're all very consistent. I think it's because they've mastered their ego much more than anyone else. And so you see the high level players certainly all will have a single good tournament. Having a single good tournament is worthless for you. It does absolutely nothing. If you're a Melee player and you're watching this, or if you're a League of Legends player, if you're any type of competitive player, if you're looking for a breakout moment, you're wasting your time. You're doing absolutely nothing. This is useless for you. Top players that have a breakout tournament, it's because they got good, and then they win, and then they're good. Players who looking for a breakout tournament and then move the pieces around and try to stack their odds, and then they take advantage of a moment where it could be a breakout tournament, they have the same breakout tournament as actual top players, but everything else is completely different. Because the actual top player got good at the game, and so he can actually recreate his results. Where the high level player, he was stacking the cards so that it looked like it was a breakout tournament. In reality, it wasn't. And you can look at this based on results, and also based on their mastery of their own ego. Cyrox was another player in Melee that did this, and he basically did nothing after his series of breakout tournaments. Now, a lot of these players complain about hand problems. Well, guess what, guys? That's just ego. We talked about that earlier. That's just ego, right? That's the reason people practice these crazy mechanical tech skills things. It's so that their hands start hurting in the future, so that they can't play, or they can't play under clutch situations. This is the level, this is the depth of ego. This is how far it goes. This is how deep it goes. There's literally no excuse ever. Nothing is an excuse. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you wake up in a coma tomorrow, or you go into, you have a nervous breakdown in the finals match and your anxiety spikes up and your doctor says you're not allowed to play that game. That's still ego. It doesn't matter. This is how serious this is. So you want to fix ego? How can you fix ego? Well, problem with ego is that if you try to fix ego, it just creates ego. So the gist of this argument, if you're trying to justify a loss for any reason, then that's ego. It's also called an output-based solution or an output-based behavior. I also call it an output-based input, and that's because I like to look at life as a function of reality, and what that means is that there would be inputs and outputs. So if you do something, that's basically an input, and it would, if it's based on an output, what that means is you're trying to do something to generate a specific output, right? You're trying to do something to engineer a result. So if you're trying to engineer a result, it's called output-based. So what ego effectively is output-based behavior, because somebody is trying to effectively change the results or skew the results or make the results look some way to help their own sense of self-importance, right? So that's why it's called output-based behavior. That's why our technical definition on this channel for ego is output-based input or output-based behavior. So that doesn't mean doing something for a reason. That's fine. If you do something for a reason, we call that a belief. That's not a output-based behavior. When you do something to try and manipulate a result, when you do something to try and control a result, that's called output-based behavior. So again, that's why it's called ego. If you're trying to look good, you're trying to manipulate the results so that you look good, right? That's why it's ego. So that's really important, because there's something called output-based or result-based, and our goal is to reduce ego, because by reducing ego, we're going to improve gameplay. Then if you make an attempt to reduce ego, No matter what the attempt is, that's actually a result-based solution, right? That's an output-based solution. So you can't ever try to reduce ego without creating ego, no matter what your proposed solution is. This is true in a philosophical sense. So somebody argued in my Discord about, well, what about drug use? What about DMT? I'm pretty sure when I take DMT, my ego gets wiped out. It's really crazy. And I said to him, no, don't you see? That was a result-based, that's literally an output-based solution. That was a result-based solution. Now your ego is held up by DMT. It's not held up by whatever it was before. This is by natural law designed to lose. You're just designing it to fail. So no, that drug use is not a solution to ego. In fact, it can't be, because it was a proposed solution to ego. So even if you try to solve ego by not having an ego, or you try to solve ego by not trying to solve ego. So some people will do this in gameplay. In fact, a popular Smash player, Mango, claimed that by not trying, he actually plays better. This, again, is not a solution. This is an attempt to solve ego by not solving ego. It's still an attempt to solve ego. That still creates ego. That does not solve ego, right? That does not make him a better player. That is a complex trap that's actually making him lose in the future. That's actually holding him back. It's an extremely complex psychological trap that he's locked into. In fact, this gets even deeper. You could have a person that would attempt to solve ego by not solving ego by solving ego, right? So if solving the ego doesn't work, okay, I just won't solve the ego then. Well, that's an attempt to not solve the ego. So I'll just try to solve the ego by not solving the ego by solving the ego, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how extreme you get here or how many layers of irony you add to this. It's always an attempt to solve ego. So some people will claim, okay, the real solution and secret to solving ego is by not worrying about it or not thinking about it. It doesn't do anything, though. Again, you are actually trying to solve ego here. So guess what, guys? Everything I just said, pretty much, besides the simplified arguments like the paradox of modesty and also the paradox of ego, also the fact that ego is output-based or a result-based solution, besides the simplified arguments, the majority of what I said has no logical basis, and there's really no basic argument you could stem from. Although I personally believe in this stuff very well, and I've never really seen anything that counteract it or contradict it. And it's impossible to argue. Some of it is wrong. You don't know the depths of the human mind. So some people will say, "No, I really just lost because my controller doesn't work." Well, why does your controller not work, right? There is an unbelievable amount of processes and history and thinking that goes into people's actions, and you're looking at decades. So I believe in this stuff 100, but there is no logical basis for it. But that's fine, actually, because the thing about ego theory is that ego theory is literally ego. Ego theory is a part of itself. It is a proposed explanation for why people lose. It is a proposed solution for ego. It's a complex, complicated workaround solution for ego. So ego theory actually can't solve ego theory, and so even though there is no logical argument for it, we're not going to worry about it. We're not going to think about it too much. But I think it's really important to think about why you're losing, and also think about the extreme lengths people will go in order to intentionally lose and intentionally fail. And guys, interestingly, we actually are going to solve ego. I know, I just said it's impossible to solve. Well, ego is not impossible to solve. You just can't solve ego by attempting to solve ego, right? And in fact, any attempt to solve ego, even attempts where you're pretending to not solve it, they would never work. Just philosophically, by that argument, they would never work. But there actually is a way to solve it, and that's what natural gameplay is. That's what natural gameplay does, and we're going to get into that. But in order to solve ego, we're going to have to understand a few things, and one of them is called understanding. One of them is called skill, and also the natural continuum. These things are going to help us technically solve ego, or at least find circumvent ego. In fact, it might not solve ego, it might actually make your ego bigger, but it's gonna give you better results, and that's what matters. So anyway, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to this channel. Also, make sure to like this video, and guys, make sure to go to my Patreon and pledge on my Patreon if you like this content and you want to see more. I will see you guys later.